For the first time in years, I found myself touching Tristan's phone. He was so attached to it, always keeping it close, even in the shower, perched on the shelf within arm's reach. It was as though he feared missing some crucial call. But, this time, at 4 a.m, the phone lay forgotten on the bedside table. He'd left it behind in his rush to go for his usual morning jog. 40 years of marriage, and he still kept up with his routine, claiming it was the secret to his energy and longevity. I'd never been bothered by his morning runs before, but this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't intend to snoop. I swear I didn't. But when the phone vibrated, I just happened to glance at the screen. Message appeared at the top, right below the clock. Miss you, honey. Jason was asking yesterday when Daddy's coming up again for the weekend. Jason? Dad? My heart skipped. The message was from someone named Rachel. I stared at it for a long time, hoping it was some mistake, that maybe the text would change with my gaze. But it didn't. My hands started to tremble, but I forced myself to focus. I had to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I needed to know if there was more to it. Tristan's password was no challenge. He used the same one for everything. My birth date, October 25th, 1959. 6 simple digits that unlocked all of his secrets. Funny how I was the key to his secrets. But those 6 digits opened more than just his phone. They opened a long history of messages with Rachel years' worth of texts, photos, and a little boy with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile, just like Tristan's. There were pictures of Tristan with the child, fishing in the park, a birthday party with cake and 7 candles. 7 years old. The boy had just celebrated his birthday last week, and Tristan had said he was leaving for a conference in Toronto. My throat went dry, and I sank to the edge of the bed, the weight of it all crashing down on me. 40 years of marriage, and I thought I knew my husband. How naive I have been. I heard the front door slam, and I quickly snapped out of my daze. Tristan had come back from his run. I hastily placed the phone back on the table exactly where it had been, and slid under the covers, pretending to be asleep. My heart was pounding so loudly, I thought he might hear it echo across the room. He walked in quietly, grabbed his phone without a word, and disappeared into the bathroom. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now with this new knowledge? The morning went as it always did. Tristan left for work after our usual breakfast: scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, freshly squeezed. Orange juice for him, coffee for me. We made small talk about the weather, the news, and our plans for the evening. Not a single sign of guilt or recognition that his whole life, everything we'd built, was about to come crashing down. Not even the smallest change in his expression. He was a master at hiding his secrets. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I opened my laptop, my hands shaking as I searched. Rachel Cobb. The name wasn't particularly rare, but with the phone photos and the mention of Jason, I knew I'd find her eventually. 2 hours later, I had the information. Rachel Cobb, 38, lives in Bedford, just 50 kilometers from our home in Halifax. She was an elementary school teacher, and she lived in a cute little house with a white picket fence. And there, in her photos, was the boy Jason. His face was too familiar. He had Tristan's eyes. The next day, I told Tristan I was visiting an old friend. He didn't even ask which one. He just nodded and went back to reading the financial news. I took our second car, the one I rarely used, and drove to Bedford. Rachel's house was exactly as I had imagined from the pictures. Neat, with a well-kept garden and children's toys scattered on the lawn. I parked across the street, watching. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Rachel returned from work with Jason. The boy in his school uniform, his backpack slung over one shoulder. They went inside, and after a while, the lights flickered on in the house. I stayed there, in my car, just watching. Around 6:15, a silver Lexus appeared in the driveway Tristan's car. He had told me that evening he was having a business dinner with clients from Vancouver. I watched as he stepped out of the car, holding a bouquet of flowers and a supermarket bag. Jason ran to greet him and Tristan scooped him up, spinning him in the air, laughing. The three of them disappeared into the house, and I watched the lights of Rachel's home flicker, filling with life. The warmth from that house seemed to shine all the way across the street, an image of family happiness that Tristan and I hadn't shared in years. I didn't cry. Oddly enough, I didn't feel the pain I expected. Instead, I felt anger, a raw, seething kind of anger. And then, more oddly, a strange sense of relief. It was as if a long unsolved puzzle had finally clicked into place. And I understood the reason for Tristan's detachment these past few years. It wasn't about me. It was about them. For the next week, I kept track of Tristan's schedule. Business trips, evening meetings, any signs of his movements. I dug through the credit card statements, the bank accounts I had access to as his wife. And that's when I found another account, a secret one, used to pay for Rachel's house and Jason's private school tuition. Every new discovery only deepened my resolve. I would not remain a victim of this deceit. I wasn't going to let him keep playing me for a fool. Our son, Hubert, had always been closer to Tristan. Tristan had invested so much time in him, grooming him to take over the business. Hubert was proud of his father's accomplishments, but with that pride came a certain arrogance. He saw me as little more than an outdated relic, a housewife who didn't understand the complexities of the business world. His wife, Peyton, felt the same, treating me with polite indifference. My grandchildren, twins Sean and Sabrina, barely knew how to act around me. They were polite but distant, never bothering to have a real conversation. I couldn't help but wonder if Hubert knew about his father's second family. Somehow, I doubted it. Tristan was a master at keeping these worlds separate, compartmentalizing his life, to keep them from overlapping. 10 days after my discovery, Tristan announced he was going away for a weekend of golf with his business partners. I smiled and wished him a good game. But as soon as he left, I drove myself straight to the office of Vincent Pritchard, the best family law attorney in Halifax. "Mrs. Homewood," Vincent said as he shook my hand with his dry palm. "What can I do for you?" "My husband leads a double life," I said without preamble. "He has a second family in Bedford. The child is 7 years old. I want to know my rights." Vincent didn't seem surprised. This was clearly not the first time he'd heard this kind of story. "What exactly do you want to achieve? Divorce? Compensation?" I hesitated. What did I want? Revenge on Tristan? To punish him for his betrayal? To claim my share of the family fortune? After a long pause, I finally said, "I want justice. I've been a good wife for 40 years. I raised his son. I supported him when the business was first starting. And now I find out he's been living a secret life for years, buying houses, having children. I want what is rightfully mine." Vincent nodded, then started explaining my options. Divorce, property division, alimony. According to Nova Scotia law, I was entitled to half of the marital estate, including the business, which was considered jointly owned, even if it was technically in Tristan's name. "What happens to his second family?" I asked. "Technically, it's not a family in the legal sense," Vincent explained. "Your husband's only marriage is to you. This woman, Rachel, is legally just a roommate. The child, if it's really your husband's, is entitled to financial support and a share of the inheritance, but nothing more. I felt a pang of sympathy for Rachel. Maybe she didn't know the full truth. Perhaps Tristan had told her stories. About retiring soon, about divorcing me, about their future together. What if I don't want a divorce? I asked. What if I want compensation for my silence? Vincent raised an eyebrow. Are you talking about blackmail, Mrs. Homewood? I'm talking about fair compensation, I replied. My husband cares about his reputation. He's a respected businessman, a member of the Chamber of Commerce, a trustee of several charitable foundations. A scandal about a second family would ruin his image. Vincent leaned back in his chair. In that case, you need to decide exactly what you want. Money? Real estate? Or maybe a stake in the business? I smiled for the first time in days, feeling a rush of control. A controlling interest in the company, I said firmly. I want 51% of Homewood Construction. Vincent whistled. That's ambitious, Mrs. Homewood. Do you think your husband will agree? He won't have a choice, I replied. It's either the stock or a scandal that will destroy his reputation and tank the company's value. The choice is obvious. Vincent explained that we needed hard evidence, photos, records, financial documents. Anything to prove the existence of Tristan's second family. I spent the next few days gathering the evidence. I took photos of Tristan entering Rachel's house, playing with Jason in the park. I copied every financial document I could find. I even recorded phone conversations between Tristan and Rachel when he thought I was out in the garden or running errands. The more evidence I gathered, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let Tristan continue to play with my life. I was going to take control. It was time to act. The evidence folder was getting thicker and thicker. I had gathered more information about my own husband's life in 2 weeks than I had in the last 5 years. Photographs, bank transaction printouts, phone records, all methodically sorted by date. I felt like a detective investigating a crime. In a way, I was. Tristan had stolen years of my life, stolen my honesty and trust. The bank statements were particularly revealing. Tristan had been generous to his second family, private school for Jason, a mortgage on a house in an upscale Bedford neighborhood, regular large transfers to Rachel's account, and all from funds that were legally our joint property. I'd driven by Jason's school several times. One day I saw Tristan picking him up after class. The boy ran out to him with such joy, such adoration in his eyes. At that moment I felt a prick of conscience. What would happen to the child if I destroyed this ideal? But then I remembered the 40 years of lies. How Tristan had betrayed not only me, but also our son Hubert, who had never suspected a thing. Meanwhile, Vincent Pritchard was preparing the legal groundwork for our plan. He'd gathered information on the ownership structure of Homewood Construction, the procedure for transferring shares, the possible tax implications. Your husband is smart, Mrs. Homewood, Vincent said at our third meeting. He has created a rather complex ownership structure for the company. 7% of the shares are owned by him personally, 20% by a trust that manages your son, Hubert's assets, and another 10% distributed among key employees. If you use 51% of Tristan's shares, it will give you control of the company, but not absolute power. That's enough. I nodded. I want control, not tyranny. Vincent hummed approvingly. There is one more thing, he continued. We have to be prepared for your husband to try to challenge the stock transfer later. He might claim that he was acting under duress. Do you have a solution? Yes. We'll draw up a contract to make it look like Tristan's voluntary decision, to provide for you in the event of his death or incapacity. A kind of insurance policy for you. It will look like a show of concern, not the result of blackmail. I smiled. Vincent was not only a good lawyer, but also a subtle psychologist. And Vincent lowered his voice, even though we were alone in his office. You need to decide what to do with the information about your husband's second family. Do you plan to tell your son? I wondered. Hubert idolized his father. It would be a blow to him to learn of his double life. On the other hand, he had a right to know the truth. Not yet, I answered. I'll deal with Tristan first. Then I'll decide what to do next. It took another week to finalize the preparations. Vincent prepared all the necessary paperwork. I chose a day when Tristan and I had no plans. A normal Tuesday. We both had to be home in the evening. Over dinner, Tristan was in a good mood. He talked about the new contract with the provincial government, about plans to expand production. I listened with a smile, thinking that in an hour his world would be turned upside down. After dinner, when we mothered into the living room, I brought out the evidence folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. What is it? Tristan asked, looking away from the clipboard. Rachel and Jason. I answered simply, looking him straight in the eye. His face froze. He stared at me for a second, unblinking, then shifted his gaze to the folder. What are you talking about? Don't, Tristan. I shook my head. I know everything about your second family in Bedford, about your 7-year-old son, about the house with the white picket fence, about the school fees and the regular business dinners on Thursdays. He was silent, contemplating the situation. I could see the various scenarios running through his head as he evaluated the options of denial, justification, confession. How long have you known? He finalized. Long enough to put this together. I opened the folder and began laying out pictures, printouts, notes. Tristan stared at the evidence of his double life with an unreadable expression on his face. Then he stood up and poured himself a whiskey. Didn't offer it to Meth the first time in all our years of family conversations. So what now? He asked, taking a big sip. Divorce? A scandal? What do you want, Bar? Justice, I replied. 40 years I've been your wife. A real wife. Not the one you forgot existed when you went back to your other family. I never forgot about you, Tristan said quietly. Really? I raised an eyebrow. It's a strange way to remember having another woman, another child. It's hard to explain. Don't even try. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in compensation. Tristan tensed up. How much? I laughed. You think money solves everything? No, Tristan. I want 51% of Homewood construction. He choked on his whiskey. What? Are you crazy? That's impossible. It is possible. I pulled out a folder of documents Vincent had prepared from my bag. Here's the stock transfer agreement. It's written as your voluntary decision to provide for me in the event of your death or incapacity. That's very thoughtful of you. I'm not signing it. Tristan cut him off. Then I'm going to the Halifax Herald with a story about an honourable businessman, Chamber of Commerce member, and charity trustee who's been leading a double life for years. Can you imagine the headlines? Tristan Holmwood, successful businessman by day, bigamous by night. What do y'all think your partners will say? Your clients, the government officials you just contracted with? Tristan turned pale. You won't do it. I will, I said firmly. I have no reason to spare you. You haven't spared me all these years. What about Hubert? You'll ruin his reputation too. Don't try to play on my maternal feelings, Tristan. Hubert's a grown man. He'll get over this scandal after all. He wasn't the one leading a double life. Tristan sat down, wrapping his arms around his head. Give me time to think. 24 hours, I said. This time tomorrow, I expect your decision. Stalks or scandal? Tristan spent a sleepless night. I could hear him pacing around his office, talking on the phone, typing something on his computer. I stayed awake, listening to those sounds too, ready to intercept him at any moment. If he decided to destroy some documents or contact Rachel. In the morning, he looked exhausted. He drank his coffee in silence and left for work. All day, I waited for his call, a message, some sign, but he didn't contact me. At 8 p.m. sharp, just as we'd agreed, Tristan came home. He walked into the living room, carrying a leather briefcase, which he set on the table. I agree, he said without preamble, but I have conditions. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my outward composure, though inside I was jubilant. First, this stays between us. Hubert must not know the reasons for the stock transfer. Second, you will not interfere with the operational management of the company, as long as I am alive. Third, you have no contact with Rachel or Jason under any circumstances. I thought about his terms. They seemed reasonable. I agree. But with one erection. I don't interfere with the company, as long as you run it in good faith. No shenanigans, no attempts to move assets, no dishonest dealings with relatives or friends. Tristan nodded. Fair enough. He pulled the documents out of his briefcase, the same ones Vincent had prepared, but with a few changes made by Tristan's corporate. Just as you wanted, he said, handing me the papers. 51% of the stock goes to you as care for the future of your beloved wife. I read the papers carefully. Everything looked right. Tristan was really giving me a controlling interest in his company. Sign, he said, holding out a pen. I signed where indicated. Tristan signed next to it. Tomorrow I'll take this to the corporate secretary for registration, he said. In 3 business days, the stock will officially be yours, I nodded, still not believing that my plan had worked so easily. So what? Tristan asked, tucking the documents into his briefcase. Now we goon with our lives, I answered. You run the company. I do my own thing. You keep seeing your other family. I don't interfere. The only change is now I have insurance, in case you decide to cheat on. Tristan stared at me for a long time as if he were seeing me for the first time. You know, he said finally, I've always underestimated you, Bal. I thought you were predictable domestic. Today I realized how wrong I was. With those words he got up and left their room. I stayed sitting, watching the door closed behind him, and only now did I feel my hands shaking. I had done it. I stood up to the husband who had dominated our family. All my life, and I won. The next 3 days passed in a strange tension. Tristan and I barely spoke, avoided eating meals together, tried not to cross paths in the house. He came home late, left early. I knew he was spending time with Rachel and Jason, but that knowledge didn't hurt anymore. I got what I wanted, my share of Phoebecinus I'd helped build over the years. On the 3rd day, Tristan came home in an unusually good mood. He even offered to have wine with me, the first friendly gesture since our confrontation. To new beginnings, Hesed, raising his glass. I tapped it wearily. The papers are registered, Tristan said. As of tomorrow, you officially own a controlling interest in Homewood Construction. I've arranged for you to have access to the corporate reports and information systems. Thank you, I said with restraint. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but I'm kind of relieved. Tristan admitted. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. No more hiding. No more lies, at least to you. I didn't say anything. His sudden candor seemed suspicious. Was he up to something? Bal, I want you to know, Tristan continued. I've never stopped caring about you. Just because I have anatherphomly doesn't mean you're any less important to me. Please spare me the platitudes. I set my glass down. We made a business agreement. There's no need to turn this into melodrama. Tristan sighed. Whatever you say, just know that I don't hold a grudge against you for what you did. I would have done the same thing if I were you. With those words, he stood up and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. I'm going to bed early tonight. Tomorrow is a big day. The presentation of the quarterly report to the board of directors. I nodded and got up to put the glasses away. When I entered the kitchen, I heard a strange sound upstairs. A thud, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. Tristan, I called out as I approached the stairs. There was Nonswa. I went upstairs and saw him lying on the floor of the hallway. His face was contorted in a grimace of pain, holding his chest. Heart, he wheezed. Cool. I rushed to the phone and dialed the emergency services. I explained the situation, gave them the address. Then I went back to Tristan. His breathing was labored, his face pale. Hold on, I said, taking his hand. The ambulance is on its way. Bal, he whispered. I'm sorry. Don't talk now. I stroked his head. Save your strength. But Tristan continued. I have to tell Rachel. Take care of her and Jason. It's not his fault. It's going to be okay. I tried to sound confident. The ambulance was coming, but I could see in his eyes that he knew hadn't have much time. His grip on my arm was weakening. Promise, he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't make a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. When the ambulance arrived, Tristan was still alive, but unconscious. The paramedics quickly loaded him onto a stretcher and carried him to the car. I followed in my car, dialing Hubert's number on the way. He didn't answer. He was probably in some kind of meeting or dinner. At the hospital, Tristan was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. The doctor, a full woman with tired eyes, told Meth that my husband was having a serious heart attack, and they were doing everything they could. I sat in the hallway feeling strangely numb. I couldn't believe that just an hour ago, Tristan and I were drinking wine and talking about the future. Fate had chosen a strange moment for such a turn. It was as if she had been waiting for this case to be over. 2 hours later, the doctor came out. I could tell by the look on his face before he spoke. I'm sorry, Mrs. Homewood, he said. We did everything we could. Tristan died at the age of 68 from a massive myocardial infarction. 3 days after he signed over-controlling interest in his company to me, the day of the funeral was surprisingly sunny. Late April in Halifax is usually rainy and dreary. But today the sky was clear, as if nature had decided to bid Tristan Homewood a fitting farewell. I stared out the window of the limousine as it drove slowly towards St. Matthew's and thought about how strange life was. A week ago, I was preparing for a fight with my husband, and now I was going to his funeral. Hubert sat next to me, pale, sunken eyes. He hadn't said a word since he got in the car. His wife Peyton and the twins were in the next car. They looked appropriate for the occasion's straight clothes, restrained expressions in their faces, but I could see Sean checking messages on his phone every now and then, and Sabrina nervously fixing her hair while looking in her pocket mirror. For them, their grandfather's death was certainly a sad event, but not significant enough to interrupt the normal course of their lives. The church was filled to capacity. Members of the Halifax business community, business partners, clients, politicians with whom Tristan had kept in touch, all came to pay their respects to the man who had built one of the most successful companies in Nova Scotia. I spotted the mayor of the city, several members of the provincial parliament, even a federal minister flying in from Ottawa. I looked around for Rachel and Jason, but I couldn't find them. Perhaps she decided not to come out of respect for Hubert. And me. Or more likely, she just didn't want to risk showing up at a public ceremony when no one was expecting her or knew her. The coffin stood before the altar, closed, covered with a wreath of white lies. Tristan's favourite flowers. I remembered how Hellways brought me Lily on our wedding anniversary, no matter the season. I wondered if he'd given the same ones to Rachel. The priest began the service. He spoke about life and death, the legacy Apperson leaves behind, the comfort we find in faith. I listened, half listening, immersed in my own thoughts. What does a widow feel at the funeral of a husband who led a double life? Grief, anger, relief. All of these emotions mingled within me, creating a strange numbness. After the priest, Hubert took the floor. He spoke of his father as an inspiring example. His business acumen, his integrity, his devotion to his family. I listened to this idealized version of Tristan and wondered if my son knew about his father's second family. From his words, from his sincere grief, I knew he did not. To him, Tristan was an impeccable father, a role model. Would Heather learn the truth? Should he? After the church service, the procession moved to Camp Hill Cemetery, where all family had a plot. Tristan's parents were already laid to rest there. Now, their son was joining them. The farewell ceremony was short. A few words from the priest, parting glances, a handful of earth on the coffin lid. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My tears had dried. Up in the hospital, the night Tristan died in my arms. After the cemetery, everyone went to our house where a memorial dinner was organized. The catering service had set up tables in the living room and on the terrace, and waiters in smart suits were serving drinks and appetizers. Everything was impeccably organized. Hubert had personally handled their preparations, not trusting me with the process. "You've been through too much already, Mom," he said. "Let me take care of it." I accepted condolences, shook hands, listened to stories of what a wonderful man Tristan was. An old golf partner recalled their games together. A business partner spoke of his integrity in business. A neighbor talked about how Tristan had helped his son get into college. All of these people knew only one side of Tristan Homewood. None of them suspected the existence of Rachel and Jason, the house with the white picket fence in Bedford, the second life he so carefully hid. I smiled, nodded, thanked them for their warm words. I played the part of the grieving widow who lost her beloved husband after 40 years together. And only occasionally, when no one was looking, I allowed myself to close my eyes for a moment. Exhale. This performance was wearing me out more than I expected. Toward evening, when most of the guests had gone, Hubert came up to me with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes were red, either from alcohol or tears. "Mom, we need Totuk," he said. "Alone?" I nodded and we walked to Tristan's office. This room had always been his territory. The dark oak paneling, the leather chair, the walls lined with diplomas and certificates. It smelled of his cologne, of the tobacco he sometimes indulged in, despite the doctor's prohibitions. His presence was still felt here. Hubert closed the door tightly and turned to me. There was a determination in his gaze that I'd only seen in Tristan's before. "I know this isn't a good time," he began, "but we need to discuss some practical matters." "I'm listening," I replied, sitting down in the visitor's chair. I wondered how many people were sitting in that chair, waiting for Tristan Homewood's decision. How many fates were decided in this room? Hubert opened the safe hidden behind the painting. The sayscape that Tristan had bought for our 20th anniversary. I'd always thought it was tasteless, that he loved it for some reason. Hubert pulled a file from the safe and placed it on the table. "My father left clear instructions in case he died," he said, opening the folder. "He was always a prudent man. I watched my son insolence. He looked so much like Tristan at that moment. The same turn of the shoulders. The way he held his head. Genetics is an amazing thing. According to his will, Hubert continued, pulling out the papers. I am the primary heir. The company. This house, most of the assets, everything goes to me. He handed me the papers. I took them. But I didn't read them. I already knew what they contained. Of course, they've taken care of you too, Hubert added. You're left with a decent sum of money, enough to live comfortably, and a country house in Chester. I was silent, watching the expression on my son's face. He spoke sympathetically, but there was impatience in his eyes. Was he waiting for my reaction? Tears, objections, gratitude. How is a mother supposed to feel when her son practically evicts her from her own home on the day of her husband's funeral? I know it's hard, Hubert continued, misinterpreting my silence. But my father wanted to keep the business in good hands, my hands. Helway said women weren't cut out to run such complex structures. I almost laughed. Tristan never said anything like that. On the contrary, he always praised my business acumen, my common sense. If you wanted to, Baal, you could run a company. As well as I could, he told me once, when I'd helped him resolve a difficult situation with his suppliers. And when do you plan inherit? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Legally, I already have, Hubert answered. My father had arranged everything to avoid a lengthy inheritance procedure. A special trust. A lifetime transfer of assets. It's illegal and clean. He took another document out of the folder and put it in front of me. Here I prepared an agreement for your relocation. Like I said, you keep the house in Chester. I've had it cleaned up. You can move in as soon as you're ready. I've got the document. Agreement for voluntary release of real estate, the headline read. My name was already typed into the appropriate fields. All that was left was to sign it. When do you think I should be ready? I asked, putting the paper aside. Hubert looked a little embarrassed. Well, I'm not rushing you, of course. A week, too. I think a month would be enough time to pack and mentally prepare for the move. A month. My son was giving me a month to leave the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house I helped pick out furnished the house I raised him in. What will happen to this house? I asked. Do you plan to live here? No. Hubert shook his head. Ton and I have a beautiful house in Bedford. This one is too old-fashioned for us. I'm planning on selling it. There's already a potential buyer. Richard Hampton. You know him. He's had his eye on this property for a while. Richard Hampton, Tristan's rival, a man my husband hated. And Hubert was planning on selling our family home to him. It was almost comical. What about the company? I continued. What are your plans? Oh, I have big plans. Hubert perked up. Dad was conservative in his management. Too cautious. I'm planning aggressive expansion, entering international markets. I'm already in talks with investors from Dubai. As I listened to my son talk about his grand plans, I thought about how quickly he'd forgotten his grief. Tristan's body was still in the grave, and Hubert was already planning to reshape everything his father had created. You have nothing to worry about, Mother, he concluded, apparently mistaking my silence for concern. Your financial situation is secure. Your father has given you a substantial sum, enough to last you the rest of your life, even if you decide to travel or find other hobbies. He spoke to me as if I were a child or an old man, as if I needed to be told basic things. What if I don't agree? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Hubert frowned. Disagree with what? Your plans? Selling the house with me moving to Chester? He looked at me with a look of bewilderment that was quickly replaced by a condescending smile. Mum, I know you're upset. Losing your father is a hard blow. To all of us. But it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. These are legally binding documents. Dad's will, the trust deed, the deed of trust, that property transfer documents. All officially certified and recorded. He leaned across the table. To me, took my hands in his. I care about you, Mom. Just like your father did. You don't have to think about business, real estate, complicated financial decisions. It's all my responsibility now. Your job is to rest and enjoy the peace you deserve. I released my hands and stood up. Thank you for your concern, Hubert. I consider your offer. He stood up too, clearly satisfied with my reaction. Of course you will. There's no need to decide anything today. I'll send my assistant over tomorrow to help you with the paperwork. I nodded and headed for the door. I turned around on the threshold. You know, your father always said that the most important thing in business is to keep your guard up. Never consider a job finished until you get a signed contract, he used to say. Hubert smiled. Yes, that sounds like him. Don't worry, Mom. All the contracts are signed and registered. I left the study, quietly closing the door behind me. There were still a few guests in the living room, but I didn't go back to them. I went up to my bedroom with Tristan, closed the door, and sat on Thebed. I took out my phone and dialed Vincent Pritchard's number. Everything's going according to plan, I said when he answered. Hubert showed me the documents that supposedly entitle him to the entire inheritance. He is convinced that the company belongs to him. Just as we suspected, Vincent replied. Tristan probably didn't tell him about the transfer to you in time. Or chose not to. What now? We wait for the official announcement of the will. It's scheduled for Wednesday, 5 days from now. Your son will get a surprise there. I nodded even though Vincent couldn't see it. Good. Until Wednesday I'll play the role of the beautiful mother who's resigned to her fate. That's an excellent plan, Mrs. Homewood. And my condolences on your husband's passing. I said thank you and passed out. I went to the window, looking out over the garden into the evening twilight. Somewhere in the backyard, the last guests of the memorial dinner were still there. They were drinking whiskey, remembering Tristan, talking about his accomplishments and legacy. And upstairs in the bedroom, his widow was preparing to do battle with her own son over what was rightfully hers. What would you say no, Tristan? I thought, looking at the family photo on the dresser. The three of us, Tristan, me, and little Hubert, about 5 years old. A happy family. Or Roni that played the role of happy family. Well, I decided to wait for the official reading of the will. Let Huber think he'd won, that he'd gotten everything he wanted. Let him enjoy his triumph. I'd still have time to show him that his father hadn't taught him all the lessons of business. The morning after the funeral, Hubert showed up at house with 2 men in strict suits. They gave me a polite nod and went straight to Tristan's office. The closed door and muffled voices made it clear that my presence there was unwelcome. These are the financial consultants, Hubert said when I asked who they were. We're discussing the company's strategy. I nodded as if I trusted him completely, and went back to the kitchen to make coffee. Through the window I saw 2 more cars pull up and other men with briefcases and files got out. Hubert met them at the door and led them into the living room, now a temporary conference room. Our house, which had been filled with mournful silence yesterday, was now buzzing like a disturbed beehive. By lunchtime, Tristan's secretary, Evelyn, came out of her office with red eyes. She'd worked with my husband for over 20 years and was as devoted to him as anyone could be. Mrs. Homewood? She approached me, lowering her voice. Your son? He's firing everyone close to Mr. Homewood. Me, Ronald, the CFO, Patrick, the production manager. They're all being replaced by his people. I squeezed her hand in mine. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Tristan really appreciated you. I know. She wiped away a tear. I don't understand how Mr. Hubert can do this. The company had just lost its founder, and he was already rearranging everything. At that moment, the office door opened and Hubert came out. When he saw us, he frowned. Evelyn, are you still here? I thought you had already packed your things. I was just saying goodbye to your mother, Mr. Homewood, she said, straightening her back. And I want to tell you that your father would be disappointed in your actions. Hubert grinned. My father understood the busyness and the need for change. Now, if you don't mind, we have more important business to attend to than sentimental farewells. Evelyn pressed her lips together. Not a goodbye to me, and headed for the exit. I stared after her, feeling a growing irritation with my son. Was it necessary to fire her? I asked when Evelyn left. She'd been loyal to the company all these years. Loyalty to your father is not the same as loyalty to the company, Hubert said. I need people who share my vision of the future, not cling to the past. With those words, he went back into the office without giving me a chance to object. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door and thinking about how quickly my son had turned his father's house into his headquarters with a regard for my feelings. The next few days passed in a similar fashion. Hubert practically took up residence in our house, turning it into a branch office of Homewood Construction. You would arrive early in the morning, bringing with him new people, lawyers, consultants, managers, and leave late at night. They occupied Tristan's office, the living room, even the dining room, laying out blueprints and plans for new projects. No one invited me to these meetings. I became almost invisible in my own home, moving between the kitchen and the bedroom, trying not to interfere with the important business discussions. One day I heard Hubert talking on the phone in the garden, thinking no one could hear him. Yes, Mom is here for now, but it's temporary, he was saying. I've already found a buyer for the house. As soon as the deal closes, she moved to Chester. No, she doesn't mind. She's always beendesel. Daddy had complete control over all the decisions. Of course, I'll leave her enough money so she doesn't need anything. I'm not a monster, Peyton. I quietly stepped away from the window so as not to give away my presence. Compliant, completely in control. So that's how my son had seen me all these years, an unwilling appendage to his overbearing father. Well, he's about to find out how wrong he was. On Monday, Hubert went to the company's headquarters for the first time. Until then, he had preferred to work from home, but it was probably time for him to introduce himself to the employees as the new owner. He returned in high spirits. Everything is going great, he said over dinner, which he unexpectedly joined. People are excited about the changes. Many admit that they've been waiting for a leadership upgrade for a long time. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Evelyn told me that the employees were worried about mass layoffs. Hubert dismissed it. Evelyn's exaggerating. We're streamlining the structure, getting rid of duplicate functions. It's a normal process when there's a change in leadership. What about the contract with the provincial government? I asked. Tristan said it was an important project. Hubert looked at me in surprise. Did you follow the company's affairs? Your father sometimes discussed business matters with me. I shrugged. I'm not as far removed from business as you think. It's good to hear you are interested, Hubert said condescendingly. As for the government contract, we are refocusing on more lucrative projects. Government contracts are stable, but margins are low. That Tristan always said that such contracts are prestige and guaranteed income in the long run. Dad was too conservative. Hubert cut off a piece of steak. Modern business requires a more aggressive approach. We are negotiating with Arab investors. for a joint project in Dubai. That's where the real money is. I remained silent even though I had many questions. Tristan had always avoided international ventures, believing that it was better to be a leader in the local market than a small fish in the global ocean. But Hubert obviously had a different opinion. That evening, I called Ronald Ferguson, the CFO of Homewood Construction and an old friend of Tristan's. He was one of the people Hubert was planning to fire. "Ronald, this is Bal. How are you?" "I'm hanging in there, Bala." Ronald's voice sounded tired. "Have you heard the news? Your son's doing a real cleanup job at the company." "Yes, I've heard the rumors. What's really going on?" Ronald sighed. "Hubert is replacing all the key executives with his own people. Many of them used to work with him at his investment firm. Young, ambitious, but with no experience in the construction industry. He has already cancelled 2 long-term projects that Tristan considered strategically important." "What about the company's finances?" "As far as I know, it's stable so far, but I'm concerned about his plans to attract outside investment for new projects. He wants to mortgage a significant part of the company's assets to get capital for expansion into the Middle East. Is that risky?" "Extremely, especially for a company that's always grown on its own." Tristan was against debt financing. I thanked Ronald for the information and promised to keep in touch. The situation was becoming more and more alarming. Hubert wasn't just changing personnel. He was completely reorienting the company strategy his father had spent decades building. The next day, Tuesday, the board of directors was scheduled. Hubert left early in the morning, saying he'd be back late. I took advantage of his absence to meet with Vincent Pritchard. "Tomorrow is the official reading of the will," Vincent said, as we sat down in a cafe near my house. "All the documents are ready. The estate attorney has already received copies of the share transfer agreement your husband signed." "What do you think Hubert's reaction will be?" I asked, stirring my untouched coffee. "Predictably negative," Vincent shrugged. "He thinks he inherited the controlling interest, and he finds out that his father gave it to you just days before he died. He'll probably be shocked, then angry, and try to challenge the deal." "On what grounds?" "Most likely incapacity of the signatory or duress. He may claim that Tristan was unable to make rational decisions due to illness, or that you manipulated him in some way." "Does he stand a chance?" "Minimal," Vincent answered confidently. "We've drawn up the documents perfectly. There is the notary's testimony that Tristan was of sound mind and acted voluntarily. There's a videotape of the signing procedure where he clearly explains his motives. Plus, the corporate secretary has already registered the share transfer in the company registry. Legally, you've owned a controlling interest in Homewood Construction since last Friday." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Tomorrow, my son would learn the truth and our lives wouldn't be the same. "I need to get ready for tomorrow," I said, finishing my coffee. "Do you think I should warn Hubert beforehand?" "Absolutely not," Vincent shook his head. "Make it official with the attorney and witnesses present. It would give him less room for maneuver." That evening, Hubert returned home in high spirits. The board of directors had been adjecessed. All his proposals had been approved. Of course, given that he had replaced half the board with his own people, it was hard to expect any other result. "We're launching a new product line," he told me over dinner. "Environmentally friendly building materials. It's an emerging market and we could be a leader." "That sounds interesting," I replied neutrally. Tristan was also interested in green technology. "Yes, but he only talked about it and I acted." Hubert poured himself some wine. "By the way, I think you should start packing. The house in Chester is ready for you to move in." "So soon?" I raised an eyebrow. "It's only been 3 days since the funeral." "Business doesn't wait, Mom." Hubert shrugged. "Besides, I think you could use a change of scenery. Too many memories here. I didn't say anything, thinking that tomorrow his plans for me would change significantly. Wednesday morning began as usual. Hubert arrived for breakfast, talked to someone on the phone about another personnel change, then reminded me about the reading of the will scheduled for 11 o'clock at the probate attorney's office. It's a formality, he said, but attendance is essential. Can you handle it? Of course, I nodded. I'll be ready by 10:30. The office of Gerald Howard, the hereditary attorney, was in an old building in downtown Halifax. It had a classic interior, heavy furniture, dim lighting, and an air of solidity and tradition. In addition to Hubert and me, his wife Peyton, Homewood Construction's corporate hotelier, Miles Pearson, and to my surprise, Ronald Ferguson, attended the reading. Hubert frowned when he saw him. Mr. Ferguson, I didn't expect to see you here. I was named in Mr. Homewood's will as a witness, Ronald replied calmly. Mr. Howard invited me. Hubert pressed his lips together in frustration, but remained silent. We all sat down at a long table at the head of which Gerald Howard, an elderly man with a neatly trimmed grey beard, was seated. Thank you all for coming, he began, putting on his glasses. We are gathered here to formally announce Tristan Homewood's last will and testament as expressed in his will dated March 15th of this year. Howard began to read out the standard wording of the will. Hubert listened impatiently, occasionally glancing at his watch. He evidently regarded this procedure as a mere formality. Now, let's move on to the distribution of the estate. Howard continued. Tristan Homewood will bequeath to his son Hubert Homewood 20% of the shares in Homewood Construction, which are already in a trust administered for him, as well as country house in Chester, with all the property there. Hubert straightened, a look of bewilderment on his face. I'm sorry, Mr. Howard. There must be some mistake. My father owned 70% of the company. I should inherit all of them. Howard looked at him calmly over his glasses. There is no mistake, Mr. Homewood. At the time of your father's death, he owned only 19% of the company, which he bequeathed to the Nova Scotia Education Charitable Trust. The remaining 51% was transferred by him to your mother, Bal Homewood, 3 days before his death. There was silence. Hubert turned slowly toward me, his face contorted with disbelief and shock. What? Howard pulled another document out of the folder. This is a stock transfer agreement signed by Tristan Homewood and Bal Homewood, notarized and registered in the company's share register. According to the document, Tristan Homewood voluntarily transferred a controlling interest in the stock to his wife in recognition of her contribution to the family business and as security for her future. Hubert snatched the document from Howard's hands and began to study it feverishly. His face grew bloodshot. It's a forgery, he finalized. Father would never have done this. He always said the company would go to me. The document is genuine, Mr. Homewood. Howard replied calmly. Your father's signature is notarized. There is a videotape of the signing procedure where Tristan Homewood clearly expresses his will. That's impossible. Hubert slammed his fist on the table. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. On the contrary, Ronald Ferguson intervened. Tristan was fully conscious and of sound mind. I was present at the signing of the document as a witness. Hubert looked at me. His eyes were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and growing rage. You, he gasped with anger. You manipulated him. You took advantage of his weakness. You made him sign that piece of paper when he was no longer himself. I met his gaze calmly. Your father was fully conscious, Hubert. He offered to give me the controlling interest himself. He thought it was only fair given my contribution to the company over the years. Liar. Hubert jumped up. What contribution? You never worked for the company. You were just a wife. A housewife. Tristan didn't think so. I replied calmly. He valued my advice, my support, my loyalty. I said the last word with special significance. I didn't think Hubert had picked up on the implication of his father's double life, but the phrase itself had struck a nerve. I'll argue it, he hissed. I'll prove that you forced him to sign those papers, that he was incapacitated. You may try. Mr. Holmwood, interposed Gerald Howard. But I must warn you that the evidence of your father's capacity at the time of signing is very strong. Moreover, the transfer of the shares has already been registered with the appropriate authorities. Legally, your mother has owned a controlling interest in Homewood Construction since last Friday. Hubert shifted his gaze to his lawyer. Miles, explain it to them. There must be some mistake. Father couldn't have done this. Miles Pearson, a young man in an expensive suit, looked confused. Yeah, I didn't know about this document, he admitted. But if it's authentic and properly executed, I'm afraid it does make a difference. Hubert turned to me again, his eyes narrowed. So, you've been pretending all this time, playing the part of the beautiful mother who accepted her fate. But in reality, you already knew the company belonged to you. I was just waiting for the official reading of the will, I said. As you should. In these situations, and know what? Hubert's voice shook with rage. What are you going to do with the company? You don't understand anything about business. I understand enough to know that your aggressive developmentals could destroy what your father spent 40 years building, I said firmly. I won't let that happen, Hubert laughed. But there was no mirth in his laughter. You won't. And how will you do that? Will you personally run the company, sort out the financial statements, hold meetings, negotiate with clients? If I have to, yes, I nodded. But most likely, I'll bring back those experienced employees that you so hastily fired. Those who really know the company and the industry. Hubert clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. I won't let you ruin my inheritance, he hissed. I will challenge this stock transfer in court. I'll prove that you manipulated my father, that you forced him to sign those papers. You can try, he shrugged. But like Mr. Howard said, the evidence of your father's capacity is pretty compelling. Hubert grabbed Edith's briefcase from the table and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around. This isn't over, Mother. You'll regret what you've done. With those words, he walked out, slamming the door so hard that a painting nearly fell. Off wall, Hayton, who had been silently watching the scene until then, looked at me confused, then hurried after her husband. There was silence in the office. Gerald Howard coughed. Well, that was emotional, he said. Mrs. Homewood, there are a few more formalities we need to discuss. Howard, Ronald, and I spent the next hour going over the details of my taking possession. I had to sign a few documents, confirm my bank details for dividends, and a few other technical matters. When everything was finished, Ronald offered me a ride home. Oh, what do you think Hubert will do? I asked as we got into his car. He'll probably go to the lawyers. Try to find loopholes in the documents, Ronald answered. But Vincent Pritchard is one of the best lawyers in town. I doubt Hubert will find anything substantial. And at a company, what could he undertake there? Ronald wondered. He's still a minority shareholder, and technically the CEO until the board appoints a new one. He could try to move assets out, make deals that aren't good for the company, turn the staff against you. So, we need to move fast. I decided I want an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Will you help me organize it? Sure, Ronald nodded. But keep in mind that Hubert has already replaced some of the board members with his own people. That's okay. I smiled. I have a controlling interest. My vote is enough to make most of the decisions. When we got to the house, I saw Hubert's car parked out front. So, he's already here waiting for me to continue the conversation. Do you want me to come in with you? Ronald asked. No, I shook my head. This is a family conversation. I can handle it. I got out of the car and headed toward the house, preparing for an uneasy confrontation with my son. Now that the truth was out, we had to determine the new rules of the game. And I was determined to emerge victorious from this fight. 3 months flew by like a day. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be managing a construction company with a turnover of tens of millions of dollars, I would have laughed. But life comes with the most unexpected surprises. After that memorable reading of the will, a real corporate upheaval began. Hubert, as promised, filed a lawsuit challenging stock transfer. He argued that Tristan had signed the documents under duress in a sick state, not realizing consequences of his actions. But the court did not accept his arguments. The video recording of the signing procedure, the testimony of the notary, and witnesses, the medical report on Tristan's state of health at the time, everything spoke in my favor. At the same time as the trial, there was a struggle for control of the company. The first thing I did was to call an emergency board meeting to present my vision for the future of Homewood construction. Hubert didn't show up, which played right into my hands. I'm not going to destroy what my husband has built, I told the board. On secondary, I want to preserve and enhance his legacy to return to the core principles that made this company successful. Quality, reliability, honesty with customers and partners. Most of the directors supported me, even those brought in by Hubert. They were professionals and saw that my approach was more sensible than my son's risky plans. The first major decision was the appointment of a new CEO. I didn't apply for the position. I didn't have the necessary experience. Instead, I nominated Patrick Mackenzie, Tristan's long-term deputy, whom Hubert was quick to dismiss. Patrick knows the company inside out. I explained to the board. He has worked with Tristan for over 15 years and shares his vision for the business. The board unanimously approved Patrick's nomination. That same day, Hubert's most risky initiatives were cancelled, including a project in Dubai that could have been a financial disaster. The following weeks were spent in intensive work. I came to the office every morning, familiarized myself with the departments, delved into documents, and participated in meetings. Many employees were wary of me at first. The boss's wife, who had suddenly become a major shareholder. But gradually, the ice melted. They saw that I was genuinely interested in the success of the company and willing to listen to those who work in it. Ronald Ferguson, reinstated as CFO, became my mentor in the world of corporate finance. Evelyn returned to her position as secretary to the CEO and helped me sort through the huge archive of documents that Tristan had left behind. He would have been proud of you, Mrs. Holmwood, Evelyn once told me. You've turned out to be much more competent than most people expected. I smiled back. The compliment was nice, though I knew there was still much to learn. Hubert didn't give up after losing in court. He tried to block my decisions through the minority shareholders, but without success. Hatton started spreading rumors among clients and partners that the company was going through a management crisis. I had to personally meet with key clients to refute these speculations. In early July, when the litigation finally ended in my favor, I decided to make changes to the shareholder structure. After consulting with lawyers and financial advisors, I offered to buy out Hubert's stake at market value. That makes sense, Patrick agreed. As long as he remains a shareholder, he will continue to cause problems. The offer was routed through the lawyers. The sum was more than generous, 20% above market value. I expected Hubert to refuse out of principle, but a week later I heard back that he was willing to do the deal. He's exhausted his financial reserves on litigation, Ronald explained when I expressed surprise, and his investment companisiums to be going through a bad time. He needs the money. The deal closed at the end of July. Hubert got his millions and was officially no longer part of Homewood Construction. I thought that was the end of our saga, but I was wrong. In early August, exactly 3 months after Tristan's funeral, I came home. After a day of work and found Hubert's car in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch by himself, as if waiting for me to return. "Hi, Mom," he said, rising to meet me. "We need to talk." I nodded and invited him into the house. We walked into the living room, the same one where I'd once confronted Tristan, with a folder of evidence of his double life. Now, there was another difficult explanation to be had here. Hubert looked drained. He'd lost weight. Shadows under his eyes, normally impeccable in his clothes. Today, he wore a wrinkled shirt and stale pants. "Would you like a drink?" I offered. "Whis, if you have it," he replied. I poured him a drink and sat down across from him. "I'm listening." Hubert took a big sip and set the glass down. "I come to apologize, Mother, for everything I said to you, for the way I acted after my father died." I stared at him in insolence, waiting for him to continue. "I was wrong," he continued, blinded by ambition, convinced I was right. "I thought I knew how to run the company better, but the last few months have shown me I was wrong." "What exactly were you wrong about?" I asked him. "Everything," he said. "In my assessment of the situation, in my strategy, in my attitude toward you. I underestimated you, Mum. I thought you were just a housewife who didn't know anything about business. But you're much more competent than I realized." Hubert's words hung in the air, and I listened to his apology with a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt a small, reluctant satisfaction. It was nice to finally have my abilities acknowledged by my son, especially when, for so long, he had dismissed me as incapable. But there was something about the way he spoke that felt a bit too calculated, as if there was more to his sudden respect than mere admiration. "And what brought you to this realization?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. Hubert took a deep breath and sighed, staring into his glass of whiskey. "I've been following the company closely for months. I've seen the financial reports, the news about new contracts. You and Patrick are doing the right thing. You're going back to the roots that your father laid, but you're not afraid to innovate. That environmental project you launched in June, it's brilliant." I nodded, feeling a quiet pride. The green building materials project was one of my first big initiatives. It wasn't as flashy as Hubert's grand dreams of expanding the company into Middle Eastern markets, but it was much more realistic, and I believed it had the potential for long-term growth. "Thanks," I said softly. "What are you getting at, Hubert?" He hesitated, taking another sip of his drink before leaning forward. "I want to come back to the company, Mom. Not as an owner, that ship has sailed, but as a manager. As a specialist. I have the knowledge, the experience, and the connections that could really help Homewood Construction." I was prepared for this. I knew it was coming. Hubert had always been ambitious, and now that his own venture was falling apart, he was looking for a safe harbor. "What position do you see for yourself?" I asked. "Director of Development," Hubert replied without a second thought. "I could help find new projects, build partnerships, expand the business within reasonable limits, of course." His eyes darted nervously as he added, "No more wild ventures with Arab investors, I promise." I stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the garden I had recently redesigned. The new roses I planted were replacing the ones Tristan had always favored. It was a small symbol of my newfound independence. a quiet rebellion against the years I had spent living in someone else's shadow. You know, Hubert, I said, my back still to him. When your father died, you didn't even wait for the funeral to end before telling me you were taking everything. The house, the company, even his personal belongings. You ruled my house without asking for my opinion. You planned to move me to Chester like I was just some burden you wanted to get rid of. You talked about me to Peyton like I was a helpless old woman who couldn't make her own decisions. I turned to face him and he was staring at the floor, not offering any defense. It's not even just about how you acted after your father died, I continued. It's about how you've treated me for years. Condescending, dismissive like I was just some second-class citizen who only existed to cook dinners and buy Christmas presents. Hubert opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. Let me finish, I said firmly. When I found out about your father's double life, I could have done a lot of things. I could have started a scandal, divorced him, ruined his reputation. But I didn't. I chose a different path. I protected my interests, but I did it quietly. I didn't make a scene. I respected what he had built, even if I didn't respect him for his deceit. I poured myself a glass of wine, letting the moment settle between us. When I took control of the company, I could have fired you on day one. But I didn't. I gave you a chance. And now, after all your failures, when your own business is on the verge of collapse, you come to me, apologizing and asking for a job. Hubert's eyes met mine, a mixture of shame and hope in them. I'm truly sorry, Mom. I was wrong, and I really want to make it right. I sipped my wine, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to believe him. He was my only son, after all. But the more rational part of me reminded me of his history, his temper, the way he could go from one extreme to the other. No, Hubert, I said finally, setting the glass down. I can't give you a position in the company. Not now. Maybe not ever. Too much has happened. Too many bridges have been burned. His face fell, as though I had slapped him. But I'm your son, your only child. Can't you forgive me for my mistakes? It's not about forgiveness, I shook my head. I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It doesn't mean I open myself up to more hurt. The company is on the upswing. We've got a solid team, a clear vision for the future. You coming back now could upset that balance. I'll work on a shared basis, Hubert insisted, his voice growing desperate. No privileges, no special treatment. I shook my head gently. You and I both know that's not possible. You're the son of the founder. You're the former heir. No matter how hard you try to be just another employee, people will always see you as more than that. And that kind of tension will only cause problems in the team. Hubert stood up, fists clenched, his frustration bubbling to the surface. So, you're just throwing me out on the street after everything I've done for this company. You've been well compensated for your share of the stock, I reminded him calmly. More than fair, actually. What you do with that money is up to you. You can save your investment firm, or start something new. But there's no place for you at Homewood Construction. He stared at me in disbelief, as if he couldn't process that I was actually turning him away. You can't do this. I'm your son. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I replied firmly. Because you're my son, and I know you better than anyone. I know your strengths and weaknesses, and I know that working for this company won't make you happy. You'll always feel like you deserve more, that you were unjustly disinherited, and that will poison both your life and ours. Hubert grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair and threw it over his shoulder. You'll regret this, he hissed, his voice low with bitterness. You'll come crawling back to me when you realize you can't run this company on your own. I held his gaze steadily. I'm doing just fine, Hubert, and I'll continue to do so. If I need help, I have a team of professionals I trust. He turned to leave, but just before walking out, he turned back to me, his eyes filled with pain and disappointment. I didn't expect you to be so cruel, he muttered, barely above a whisper. It's not cruelty, Hubert, I replied quietly. It's justice. And if you ever learn the difference, maybe we can have a real relationship not as business partners, but as mother and son. But Hubert wasn't listening. The door slammed behind him, and the sound of his car's engine roared as he sped away. The noise faded as he left, and I was left alone in the living room with a glass of wine in my hand, feeling strangely liberated. Another week passed. Hubert never called or showed up again. I heard from mutual friends that he had sold his house in Bedford and moved to Toronto to start fresh. Perhaps it was for the best for both of us. At the end of August, I decided it was time to finally do something for myself. I had always dreamed of traveling in Europe, but Tristan had always found reasons to postpone the trip. Company business, bad timing, or some project that couldn't wait. Now, I was free to make my own decisions. I mapped out an itinerary. London, Paris, Rome, Florence, Venice, Barcelona. 6 weeks of exploring Europe, something I had dreamed of doing since I was young. Patrick assured me the company would do just fine without me. If necessary, we could always communicate by video conference. The night before I left, I visited Tristan's grave. I placed a bouquet of white lily, his favorite flowers, at the base of the stone. I did it, Tristan, I said softly, gazing at the grave. I protected the company you spent a lifetime building. Maybe not the way you planned, but the results are good. Stocks are up. Customers are happy. Employees feel stable. The wind rustled the trees above me, and for a moment, it felt like Tristan was answering me. I don't know if you wanted me to know about your second family, I continued. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe part of you wanted the truth to come out. Either way, it changed everything. It woke me up. I stared at the simple inscription on the granite headstone. Tristan Homewood, loving husband and father. I don't hate you, I whispered, my voice steady. But I don't miss you. It's strange, isn't it? 40 years together, and now I feel liberated. Like I was living someone else's life, and now I'm finally living my own. I adjusted the flowers and straightened up. Goodbye, Tristan, I said softly. I hope wherever you are, you found peace. The next morning, I took a cab to the airport. The driver helped me load my suitcases into the trunk and asked where. I was headed. Europe, I said with a smile. Fulfilling a lifelong dream, alone. Really? He asked, his curiosity piqued. By yourself? Yes, I nodded. And you know what? I love it. For the first time in my life, I'm in complete control. Of my time, my decisions, my path. It's intoxicating. The driver smiled back, starting the engine. The car began to move, taking me away from the house I had shared with Tristan for 40 years. A house that was finally, truly mine. Not as Tristan Homewood's wife, but as Baal, a woman who had finally learned to live her own life. Europe was ahead of me, full of new impressions, new experiences. And when I returned, I would return to a new life, a life that was just beginning, even at 65. And that thought filled me with a joyful anticipation, knowing the best was yet to come.